Almost everybody out there forgets about Snare Reso head choice. In fact, most people will spend time muffling, tuning, swapping out the wires, buying a new drum before they even consider whether or not they're using the right Snare Reso head. So today, we're going to make it easy for you. The choices out there can be really confusing with all of the flowery and poetic language that goes into describing how these drum heads work. I blame Ben for this because for a long time he was the one responsible for this flowery and poetic language. We're going to ignore all of the haikus and hyperbole involved in this and dive into a simple, straightforward comparison of Evans' offerings in 2mm, 3mm, and 5mm snare side heads. We're even going to include our method for getting the best possible snare wire tension. In addition to this direct comparison, we're going to answer the following questions. Number 1, why would you choose one of these heads over the other options? 2, is durability even a factor here? And 3, what is the snare side head even responsible for? If you're at all curious about the gear that we're using today, check out the description below. We hide lots of great, important, and not terribly hidden information down there. Without further ado, let's hear some snare sounds.
Okay, so a quick note to address something that you may have noticed there. One thing, the demo for the Snareside 500, the 5mm version, pitch was a little bit higher, right? Actually, the snare side head was at the same pitch as all of the other demos, but one thing that we overlooked initially is with the use of this Acrolite, when we apply tension to the snare side, it's applying a little bit of tension to the batter side as well. It's shifting the lugs, it's pulling away from that just a little bit. So as a result, as we were tensioning the snare side up a little higher because it's a thicker head requires a little bit more tension in order to achieve the same pitch as the 2mm and the 3mm options, we were inadvertently changing the pitch of the batter head just a little bit. So as you're listening throughout all these demos, don't get too hung up on the little bit of pitch shift that took place there. Really be focusing on the snare response and the overall tone between the batter head and the reso head.
Rather than going through a ton of different tunings today, we are choosing to focus on a single tuning and get deep into the dynamic response, the tone, and any other variables we're experiencing at this given tuning. Stick with us to the end of the video where we'll do an overview of the exact pitches that we're utilizing in these demos as well. Now that we've heard these sounds in isolation, let's put them into the context of a groove, see how they blend in. The demo you just heard is a medium volume level, and we're going to go through very quiet playing and also super aggressive playing. At the medium volume level, the 3mm head is giving me what I expect because that's generally what I use, which is good dynamic response across the full range, plenty of sensitivity, and doesn't choke out when I start to dig in a little bit more. Moving to the 2mm, we're getting a much bigger note at this medium range, a lot more snare response, and overall a lot broader, while still having tons of clarity when we play little light stuff. When we step up to the 5mm head, things start to get a lot tighter, a lot more focused, and the behavior of the snares is much more brief, while still retaining the full note of the drum. The great thing about this is all three of these sounds are super fun, super different, and the only variable that we swapped out was the snare side head. It's even tuned to the same pitch, so this is exactly what we're looking for in terms of seeing the difference. Overall, all three of these sounds work in a medium volume range. If the differences don't seem super obvious to you right now, they're going to start to become a lot more apparent when we move to much quieter playing and much louder playing. Next up, we're going to explore the low volume side of this. The first thing that I'm noticing here is that I'm really enjoying the 2mm head the most because it is giving a lot of tone, a lot of beautiful snare response. The feel is also very pillowy and nice. As I move to the 3mm head, again, similarly to before, it's what I'm expecting because it's the middle of the road, but nothing jumps out between the other ones with this one. And the 5mm head feels a little bit gated when we get down here. It's nothing wrong with it at all, but it's not giving us quite as much back when we hit the drum this quietly. The tone of the drum with the 2mm head is much rounder, and the note itself has a much more fatness to it, which is really great for slower tempos, and generally speaking, it gives us a lot of tone immediately at the note when we strike the drum, which is wonderful for this kind of dynamic range. Somewhere I could see this being really useful as a secondary snare for opportunities when I want to use it for a ballad or something like that and want to get away from a more articulate, clear, and cutting snare sound. Not to mention if I'm playing in a smaller room and I'm not mic'd and want something that's really going to give a beefy, round backbeat to the music. If you're enjoying this little journey that we're on today, please take a minute and follow the link below to our Patreon. It's a great way to help us continue to get to make these videos, and there's lots of extra content over there. All right, we've made it. It's time for the high volume playing. Well, that was super fun, and I have had not a ton of experience with 5mm snare side heads before, and it is giving me a lot of really exciting sounds that are not present in the 3 and the 2. The main thing that's thrilling about this is that hitting it very hard is not giving us a particularly long, protracted, sustaining note. The wires are punching, and then they're getting out of the way immediately. The beautiful thing is that the drum itself is not choked out, but the wires and the snare side head are working together to alleviate a lot of extra sustain and things that make these fast fills and aggressive backbeats a little messy. Now, it needs to be said that we are in a studio environment here. It's not practical to hit this drum as hard as I physically can to get a high volume sound, but relatively speaking, this is aggressive enough to get this head to do the thing that it's designed to do. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, the 2 is also doing something super interesting, in my opinion, and that is it is opening up massively. It's giving us a ton of snare wire sound, and it sounds almost as if there's reverb or echo or something built into the drum when it's set up this way. Now, if I'm playing in a room where I'm going to be hitting hard, but I don't necessarily need to have the sound slice through the rest of the band, this is a really fun alternative, and it reminds me of recorded sounds from Radiohead records and other situations where people want to have a little more production going on. The source of this behavior in the drum is that a 2mm head having less mass is under less tension at the same pitch, which means that it can move a lot more, it can sustain a lot more, and it's interacting with the wires for a much longer time before the whole sound dies out. If you love what you're seeing here today, please celebrate that joy by hitting the like button below, as well as the subscribe and the notification bell so that you hear about all of our new videos that are coming out. It's the best way to keep track of what we're doing here. For those of you curious about the way that we dial in our snare wires here, we have a specific method, and we're going to demonstrate it for you now. I've engaged the mechanism, but turned the dial all the way to where the snare wires are completely released from the bottom head, and I'm tapping the batter head as I slowly increase that tension until I get them tight enough to have articulation, but not so tight that they're choking out the batter head. At a very low dynamic, if you tap the center of the head and hear the drum head itself before you hear the snare wires, you've gone too far. If you made it through all of that and you're still asking yourself, well, which head is the best, it's time for us to talk about context. For 9 situations out of 10, a 3mm snare side head is going to get you exactly what you need from low dynamics to high dynamics at low tensions or high tensions. Now, having said that, there are special occasions where a 2mm is going to get you something more exciting than the 3, or 5mm might be more appropriate for the music that you're making that day. If you have the luxury of owning multiple snare drums, it might be worth setting them up more differently than you currently do, whether it's the tuning range or actually changing out the heads like we did today. This can mean that you'll have options to reach for rather than wondering what had happened if you changed everything up on your primary drum. Hopefully the demonstrations today will take you down a path where you have some sense of what head is going to get you the result you're looking for, rather than thinking about an overall best choice. Now, does durability matter when we talk about a head that we're never even hitting with a stick? It does, to the extent that that head is receiving energy every time we hit the drum. We're not concerned about stick marks and pitting and that kind of thing, but over a long enough timeline, the head is going to get stretched out to the point where it's unable to resonate anymore and not give us any of these unique things that each of these thicknesses is affording us today. Unsurprisingly, a thinner head is going to exhibit this stretching out behavior sooner than a thicker one because there's simply less material there. Having said that, don't let that deter you from experimenting with thinner heads, because we're talking about a pretty long timeline, all things considered. And one little broken record moment, this is a great reason to not crank your snare side heads as tight as they will go. It will wear them out faster, and it will also really limit the possibility of effectively experimenting with different snare side head tensions because it's already stretched all the way. But at the end of the day, what is the snare side head responsible for anyway? Well, same as any other resonant head, it is controlling, modifying, sculpting the tone of the drum. It's also changing the pitch of the overall drum, depending on where we tension it at, and it's connecting us to the snare wires. This means that the thickness of the head and also how tight we have it is going to dramatically affect how we interact with the wires because we're hitting the other side of the drum. Another thing to consider is that as we move through these 3 thicknesses of heads, because they are at different thicknesses and thus at different tensions to get a given pitch, we are having to increase the tension of the wires as the head gets thicker in order to get the response that we're looking for. We hope today's video was helpful in your journey to new and different and exciting snare side heads. And now, a word from Ben, who's going to read us some of that flowery copy from our friends at Evans Drumheads.
200 snare side. Enhances sensitivity while reducing sustain for greater articulation. 300 snare side. Provides all levels with a wide dynamic range and controlled snare response. 500 snare side. Produces a dark, throaty sound for deep drums or heavy rock performances.